you so much for joining us for another amazing session of the Speakers Forge. We're very excited to have an incredible special guest today. For today's session, we are going to be talking all about machine learning and medical devices, something that is really interesting. And what I absolutely love is Kirsten's passion for doing things holistically and considering all of the aspects that come into play. So, for those of you who don't know, Kirsten is at Opti-Num, so she does a lot of really meaningful work within their space. She is currently, and I might be wrong in terms of title, but she's currently the head of strategic innovation, which means that she's there to make sure that the communication and technology come together in a really impactful way. So she also has an incredible background in biomedical engineering and has done so many interesting things. So thank you again for your precious time. We really appreciate it. The session is being recorded as always, guys, and we're going to have a really fun time together learning all about this. So I don't want to steal too much of Kirsten's time, so I'm going to let her jump in and get started. So long.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction, and now I don't have to do anything more. So, already introduced me as Kirsten Smith, and today I wanted to share with you a little bit of my journey. I've been working for a couple of years now on trying to get some innovative tech into medical devices. And so what I'm going to share with you today is around that. I thought I would start off by addressing an elephant in the room, because there's this word innovation, and it means so much to very different people. But to me, innovation is about creativity, it's about design, it's about finding a practical solution with what you've got in your back pocket. It feels like ideas, it often tastes like failure and rejection. Some folks might think about innovation in water filtration systems with recycled aluminium components that redirect the sun's energy. But in reality, practical innovation can be used as like a sock to filter water with. So with that in mind, that's where we're headed. So let me unpack that a little bit more. So, you know, it really comes down to the tools that you've got at your disposal, what materials are available, what's your budget. It comes down to what have you learned from those that have come before you, and what have others done to solve this problem before. I think most importantly, why do you need the sock filter, and what's the end purpose of the filtered water? If it's for drinking, then no, maybe a sock is not okay. But if it's for swimming in, maybe it's okay. In a South African context, we often pride ourselves on the ability to make a plan and get the job done. And we shouldn't forget about that, but we can be smart and learn or leverage what others have done before us. So this image here, what we're looking at is there's some studies that have been done by the World Economic Forum about skills and where we're headed and what's trending right now, and what can we expect to be heading in the next couple of years, especially around innovation. So often as technical people, we focus heavily on the technology and the technical design, but we shouldn't forget about creativity, how it's good for the economy, good for the environment, good for people, and good for the world. Hopefully, some of my journey today will show you how I've experienced these things playing out. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the company I belong to, Opti-Num Solutions. It was founded in 1992. And what we do is collaborate with our clients from a wide range of industries, applying their IP with our innovative thinking and class-leading tools to develop meaningful solutions that impact their ability to make evidence-based business decisions. So Opti-Num Solutions works across an exceptionally broad range of industries. As you can see, financial, telco, retail, environmental, and medical. And we believe in long-term partnerships with our clients. We leverage our multidisciplinary knowledge and our cross-industry expertise to bring value to our clients. Our team is highly qualified and passionate about finding practical solutions. Yeah, so that's where I come from, and that's what Opti-Num does. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've done, and then unpack the full journey step by step of how we go from an idea to a product pilot. The context for the story, the journey, is around the partnership. We kicked off with a medical device manufacturer to bring an AI advisory feature into X-ray imaging. And this would allow medical clinicians in the field to get recommendations on anomalies in the patient X-rays that they're reviewing. The benefit of that advisor is that both the patient and the clinician, in time-critical cases, benefit from extra diagnosing and decision-making abilities. So that's what we're doing today. So where I wanted to start, the very first step in this journey, is in selecting the value proposition, essentially the minimum viable product. And some of you might be familiar with this term, but for anyone here who isn't familiar, a minimum viable product is a version of a product with just enough features to be usable by early consumers who can then provide feedback for future product development. It's a concept from Lean Startup that stresses the impact of learning in new product development. So I'd like you to keep this in mind as we step through what we did in the application of machine vision in a medical device. Cool. So many years ago, I think it's 3 years ago now, we kicked off a VACWork project as an unpaid proof of concept and demonstrated the viability of using the MathWorks tools for prototyping different machine vision techniques and deploying a solution. You can see the size of our team was really small. We had 2 third-year mechatronics students and a project lead, um, and that's where we started. And just to give you an idea of where Opti-Num operates, we generally operate between the bands of, we do management consulting, figuring out the pain, and coming up with a solution that will really address our clients' need. And then we build out solutions for them using software development, data science, and modeling. So in this context, for that POC, our work really centered around sort of data science and experimenting to see what was going to happen there. So our first case study was, we have this challenge that, there's a scarce skill issue in South Africa, and especially in trauma clinicians and pathologists and radiologists, there's just not enough skills to actually meet the demand. And there's a need where full body x-rays in trauma situations need to be quickly flagged for abnormalities to capture all the abnormalities. So what we did, we cascaded 2 networks, one for supervised classification using transfer learning and another using object detection. And the result was an app that is able to detect abnormalities in DICOM images. That's the format of the X-ray images. And it was a user-friendly app that our client could see. And really, it just gave us the opportunity to test a number of different techniques with 2 students in 6 weeks and build an app for the client that showed them that this was possible, that this could be done. So follow that on. Where we went to from there is once we'd initially demonstrated, we can do this, it's possible. We then stepped into building a little bit more of a software element into our deployed feature and kind of expanding on the initial data science dabbling that we did with the students. So we ran a pilot project, and the aim of it was to demonstrate the viability of computer vision in a medical application, and more specifically that we could integrate it into their existing medical device infrastructure and architecture. Again, you can see my team on the left-hand side. It's quite a small crew, but we packed quite a punch. Together we had backgrounds in biomedical and electrical engineering, as well as computer science. So in order to get that pilot right, we needed to be very aware of how to scope and budget such a paid pilot. By the way, nobody teaches you this at varsity. It's one of those things that real life experience teaches you. In our case, for our first pilot, we selected the following objectives for our MVP. So we wanted to have a testing time that was less than 5 minutes. We wanted to train on at least 250 labeled images, and we wanted to achieve a prediction in a confidence range of between 65 and 85%. In the terms of how we structured the POC, we had three objectives. We wanted to integrate completely into the existing infrastructure and user interface, extract and identify a feature abnormality that would be easy for a non-expert to label. We were then very explicit about some success criteria, as I've showed you here, on how we would measure our success. And that's really important. Often we can neglect that because we're afraid to set targets that we might not achieve or don't feel are ambitious enough. But as you'll see later, it's really essential for delivering success to your client. This is often the opposite way around in academia, when you want the simplest minimal requirement to produce a viable thing that can be tested in the market. Some of you might look at this and think that, the bar was pretty low for this pilot. 5 minutes processing time, only 250 labeled images, and a prediction range of only between 65 and 85%. I think here, understanding where we were coming from is really we 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 accept the need that we need to embrace the possibility that we don't know what we don't know. We didn't know how intensive the processing time would be. We didn't know how much effort it would take and who would label the images. And we didn't know what kind of an accuracy we'd get in, but we were able to negotiate this with the client. And when they agreed to it upfront, then that's the target we were tracking. So it's all about client satisfaction, really, and the scope and the cost and how much effort we're going to put into it. So this is the structure of our POC and what happened in the pilot that we ran that year. So the challenge remained the same, but what we were able to do in 4 months is that we were able to demonstrate the complete integration of an AI advisor feature into the existing medical device software architecture. Using a small subset of labeled X-ray images, we were able to achieve a prediction accuracy of 99%, with each X-ray being analyzed in 20 seconds. We solved that problem by leveraging our experience in data science and engineering, and we were able to build a streamlined and collaborative platform for prototyping to production using our software engineering expertise. So I think we were particularly successful here due to the close partnership we were able to leverage with the clinicians by using the MATLAB image labeler application, as well as with the product software team by collaboratively writing shared helper libraries in C++. The development of the solution allows clinicians in the field to use an existing user experience, something they're familiar with. They're very comfortable with the interface. They've been using it for years. It's already practically stress tested. And we use trusted software like MATLAB for image processing and machine vision and modeling, as well as C++ for infrastructure. So this is kind of what the result of our POC was. We can take in a full body X-ray and we're able to return just a bounding box region of interest when there is a fracture in the femur. I think particularly we focused here in this pilot, we were targeting compound fractures in femurs, and the reason being it's a really simple thing for someone who's not a clinical expert to be able to label, to see, to be able to tell if the network's performing correctly. So again, minimum viable product. We want the minimal features to demonstrate we can do this technology, we can integrate it with your existing user interface, and we're able to bring this kind of value out. So what happened after that? Okay, so you're going to ask me, how did we solve the challenge? And I'm sure many of you technically are interested in the actual nuts and bolts of the AI deep learning models that we used. And I'm not going to lead you on. I can't really tell you the technical details about how we solved the problem. What I can do is share with you the full journey from pitching, contracting, data considerations and investigations, and the modeling approaches we took. I want to talk to you a bit about deployment and infrastructure and why we used MATLAB to solve the problem, and why we need to consider things like ethical responsibility and safety regulations. If we have time, I can also show you 2 other examples of how MathWorks has used machine vision tools to deploy into healthcare devices. So stick with me and stay open to some ideas that you might not have heard before. You're welcome to shoot me questions in the chat, but I'll probably only get to them at the end. Cool. So yeah, keeping an open mind, when we're in the real world, we have to work smart and not hard, and we need to have a courage sort of mindset and a scientific mindset where we're experimenting, we're trying new things. We accept that we're not masters of data science in medical imaging. We recognize that our approach is to learn. So take the particular problem, the particular data, the particular end users we're encountering, and try and approach and learn and develop and iteratively improve until we have something worthy of compliance, certification, deployment into the market. So I'm sure you guys have seen this image before. It's very familiar to developers, but we know how things get kind of warped through the journey of what the end user actually needs, and many years later, what the customer actually gets. So let me take you on that path as we step through it. So I told you that we had to define the MVP and the scope, and that's not the end, it's the beginning. It's the first step to making this happen. It's to pitch a solution, agree on an MVP and scope with the client. So we motivated for that, we aligned it, and we agreed on the minimum requirements and motivated for that scope. Then there's a whole lot of contractual obligations, documentation. We had to fill in agreements, write a non-disclosure agreements, clarify IP, what's the existing IP, what's the future gained IP, who holds responsibility for that, and how will we share it and use it going forward. It was really a complex process, and it involved a lot of learning in those commercials and contracting, and it's essential for actually starting a partnership. So this is now stepping into the case study of, all right, we ran an unpaid POC with VacWorks students. We then ran a paid pilot with a small team. And then this is fully fledged MVP product to deployment, taking this to market in a phased approach. And so for our first phase, the next step after the pilot is really stepping into the realm of product development. The team now, I don't have a photo of the team because we're about 15 people in the team. We can't fit all the photos onto this little space of the slide here. But we're a team that consists of clinical application specialists, C and MATLAB developers, data scientist specialists, as well as business stakeholders. I'm still sticking with the MVP objective and how we defined our use case and success criteria carefully. I can show you how the next steps have played out. So in order to get the launch of an actual product right, we needed to be very aware of how to scope and budget this MVP. And so our use case ended up being in a trauma environment as the first priority, in adult, male and female subjects, not bariatric patients, not pediatric patients, but adult, male and female. So in our case, for the first launch, we selected the following objectives. We wanted to build an assistive AI tool that assists in the diagnosis of pathologies and highlights regions that may have sustained injury. It's important for me to note that this is an assisting tool. It's not a diagnosing tool. It's really there to support the clinician and the pathologist. We are not professing to be any better than them, but really in a time critical, crazy situation, as you can see in the trauma environment, how can we support them? What would make a difference? So in order to reach that, we're really aiming to get a testing time under a minute in processing time. We want to train on at least 3,000 labeled images. That's a big jump from where we were, on 250 images for the pilot. And we want to achieve a prediction with confidence in the range of 90%. So those are our success criteria. And the regions we selected are the chest and the head regions because we identified that they're significantly important in a trauma situation. And the target that we're approaching in terms of the pathology will be skeletal fractures, foreign bodies, and soft tissue injuries. Again, we need to embrace the possibility that we don't know what we don't know. And so we're gonna discover, we have discovered along the way a lot of things that we weren't expecting. You can see the range of patients that are possible just from this small snapshot here that I'm showing you. So this is our use case, and it's where we started with our product deployment plan, that we're going to build an assistive tool that highlights regions of interest that may have sustained injury in typical cases in trauma. These are anterior, posterior, full body x-rays that detect head and chest regions. We recognize in this use case somebody who's coming into this kind of scan, they're going to be scanned in 13 seconds and often in a really hectic, severe trauma situation. Somebody whose legs are sometimes broken in multiple places or head injuries. They're not going to be perfectly positioned and they're not going to be lying flat in like the perfect orientation. And we want to do this in 1 minute. So that's our plan. And what we've done so far is, okay, again, we've used image processing and deep learning to segment regions and then detect anomalies in those regions, specifically the head and the chest. We were able to generate C++ code from our MATLAB code, and we developed C++ helper libraries to integrate into the existing software. The result is this integrated feature that segments a full body X-ray into regions and is able to advise the trauma doctors in the existing user interface. And at the moment, it's sitting at 85% accuracy, running in about less than a minute. So we still have a way to go here, but this is where we headed, and this is what we've built so far. You can see on the left-hand side, these are kind of crude displays that show technically what we've done. It's not what lands in the user interface necessarily, but you can see that we're picking up anomalies in the head and chest region, and there's different ways of us to visualize the output of the AI. You can view this heat map. For those of you who would be interested in this basically shows it's a heat map of probability of how abnormal this image, each pixel of this image is, how abnormal is it from the normal image the images that we have. And so that's how this overlays. And to some people, interestingly enough, it makes a lot of sense. They love it. And to other people, they just don't like it. They don't understand what it means, and they think it like creates noise in the image. So we're also learning a lot about personal preference in terms of displays and overlays. So yeah, so how we went about this, we outlined the use case. We started extensive documentation on requirements, software requirements, etc. We had to collect and anonymize data, modeling to remove background artifacts, segmentation and detection. We did modeling reviews for systematic verification. We then took our model results and did validation with end user engagements. And so I'm going to expand on some of that as we step through it. I see, Anine, you asked a question about how did we go about gathering feedback. It's a really good question. It started out quite formally in terms of engaging with existing clients and showing them, presenting to them what we did. And there's different end users as I'm going to get into next. But then it also has become quite informal, where there's a small team of us that are sitting out and talking to end users about what we're building and showing them what we have in different mock-ups of the application. So yeah, let's talk more about end user engagement. So what our aim is, we're trying to develop this software. It's integrated into the Lodoc software and it identifies abnormalities in a full body X-ray. We recognize that there are minimal facilities and minimal resources, and our aim is to aid both the patients and the clinicians with a quicker turnaround to manage, screen, and diagnose. So the messaging is very important. when engaging with the end users, because we don't want anybody to feel intimidated about we're taking their jobs or we're replacing them. That's absolutely not what we're doing. We're really building a assistant that helps to triage in high volume cases. We saw as we went through COVID, the volumes of patients we can face when there are disasters or when the skills are just too short. So if you can imagine how this plays out, and I'll show you another image, we have the Lodox device with the radiographer capturing the full body x-ray, and they're essentially the technician who knows how to use the x-ray device. And they then would send that full body x-ray to the trauma doctor, who would then do the diagnosis. And this is a specialized clinician who knows trauma, who is experienced, who can pick up just looking at an x-ray where the problem areas are. What we want to do is in parallel, so not to disrupt the workflow, is to be able to do an automated assessment of that X-ray image very quickly, under a minute, and share the anomalies and segments back to allow for potential repositioning if necessary, or potential changes to the treatment plan. So if you can imagine this playing out in the workflow for how this happens, you have somebody comes into trauma and they hurt in some way. The radiographer captures their full body X-ray on the Lodox. This is where our AI sits. The trauma doctor gets that information and is able to stabilize the patient quickly. And thereafter, an even further specialized radiologist then evaluates the X-ray and says, there's a hairline fracture on this rib, and more specific granular details. So that's the workflow, and it means that our end user on the product is quite complex. It means that we have a technician radiographer using the machine who's actually using the software, but then different end users for trauma doctors and radiologists, and how they engage with actually the results of the Lodox. So to unpack this whole development process, you can imagine that there are different kinds of patient trauma. There are people who have fractures, people who have foreign objects like bullets or knives inside of them. We've got people who maybe have TB or who have COVID or who have different soft tissue diseases. We also have this happening all over the country in different hospitals. We collect that data, anonymize it, and we get radiologists and radiographers to analyze our data and label it. Then we train our AI models. We're then able to verify against a ground truth. So essentially, we take our label data and we partition it so that we're able to test our predictions against what the ground truth was. But then the next step after that is to actually stick it into the field in a clinical environment and evaluate for the different kinds of patients that come in and the traumas that they have. Do these people, the trauma doctors and radiologists, is the AI advisor behaving the way they would have expected? And that's a really important step, and we'll come back to that just now. So I'll touch on a few parts that make up this whole picture. I mentioned earlier about data. We have to do a lot of thinking about where it comes from, how it will be anonymized, what criteria must be met in terms of labeling our data set, the image quality and format, the workflow of how it gets labeled. Essentially, we actually have to do training with a clinician to teach them how to label our images for our AI. And then we have to figure out, when we share data with different participants who are going to do labeling, what are the risks and security considerations we have to make. We have to consider how to move the data. We're working online, we're working on the cloud. How do we access the data in a way that's still protected? And where do we store it that's safe? So, part of that data investigation, if you have a look at this figure and thinking about, okay, we have the realm of computer science, maths and statistics, and then the application domain. And we know that computer science and maths and stats, we get to the realm of machine learning and data science. And if we kind of step away from actual technology applications, we're sitting in the realm of traditional research. And so many of you might look at this plot and look at that danger zone and think, well, we don't want to go there. Why would you go there? But I think the challenge is that if you can step into that application domain with an intention and a scientific mindset of learning and adapting, we're actually able to start impacting the world and making a difference. So we have to, when we work with our data, we inspect it, we clean it, we process it, we find anomalies in the normal data, we embrace the real versus the theoretical. You can read tons of papers and research articles about exactly how it should be done and what the theory says. And then you enter the real world of trauma, where a guy literally has a javelin sticking through his chest. And how are you gonna treat that when he wasn't imaged perfectly? The format conversion. When do you lose data in each step of the conversion, and which conversions should you make? How do you manage your sampling when you partition your data? And so it's quite complex in terms of all the considerations we need to think about and the pre-processing steps before we actually get to modeling. So our approach for the modeling, we take an agile stance and we analyze, we iterate, we measure, we evaluate, we learn. We found out that maybe that's not the best approach, and we go around again and we do iterative modeling until we've trained a network and the results are looking good. And then we investigate further and we balance the data set and we consider the density of the data in an X-ray image, and we try again. We have to make design decisions, and we have to manage trade-offs between quick fixes and hacks. And when we're doing what we must for a pilot on a tight budget, and when we're actually doing what we must for responsible deployment for certifiable product. So I can show you a little bit about our approach and how we took this on. I'm sure that you'll find a little bit of this interesting. So we start with label data, and we partition our label data into training, validation, and testing. I'm showing you this label data in terms of like compound fractures in a femur so that you can understand what we did. And we take that partition data set and we take the training and validation set and train deep learning networks on it. And we do it iteratively. Like I was saying, we do this over and over and over with different networks, with different um, research methodologies, and we see what the results do. And we call that the learning workflow. Then once we've got a pretty decent result, we check that against our testing partition, and we see, what's the results actually looking in terms of the whole set, and that's the testing workflow. And then what we do is we then deploy that function into a separate function, and we take unseen data, non-labeled data, and we see what are the outputs of that, and that's the deployed workflow. So just some comments on this. As AI use rises in production, there's a growing need to explain, verify, and validate model behavior in safety critical situations. You can see a couple of different examples of how that's impacting many industries and fields at the moment. Some of the challenges we're facing with these in terms of AI-enabled systems is traceability, consistency, explainability is a big thing across many different industries, testing, bias, data completeness. We even come to bias in this test case with this subject matter, where we find that interestingly in trauma, we've got it's 3 times more male subjects than female subjects in the data sets. And this is across multiple hospitals in the whole country. And there's just far less female trauma subjects. And that means that we have to balance that data set. Otherwise, we're going to bring in bias into our modeling results. So model governance is essential, and it's a big part of what we have to do to reach compliance. So the MathWorks tools has capabilities addressing each area of this diagram, and I'm going to unpack that slowly just now just to show you how we verify models. We have a library that verifies and tests the robustness of deep learning networks. And our safety critical certification expertise in the MathWorks tools helps drive new AI standards. So AI standards in medical devices is brand new. The FDA is literally releasing its first AI-based software as a medical device action plan. And the action plan is literally addressing how to interrogate these models and how to make decisions about whether they are safe and compliant and explainable. So how do we demonstrate that? So what we're able to do is with our AI applications, we're able to look at what are the system requirements and the design requirements, and how do we allocate those particularly to the machine learning components that we need to manage. Then we need to consider the data. So how is the data being balanced? What does it look like? How is it labeled? Then the learning process. So what are the parameters we've tuned? How will we manage it working? How did we model those? How did we come up with those models? And what is our scientific approach for the parameters that we came out with? We then do model training and we do learning process verification. So essentially almost interrogating how did you go through the process of selecting your models and your parameters. Then we implement the models. We're able to do inference and infer the verification and integration. Then we do independent data and learning verification. So basically a whole separate, pass it over a fence, get it to do something on data it's never seen before in a totally separate environment, verify that it's performing against the requirements we initially identified, and then verify as a whole the subsystem or the system. So this is one process mechanism that the tools that we use allow us to do this kind of evaluation. I'll touch on a little bit on IP and knowledge gain. I'm skipping over a lot because I have to, because this IP doesn't belong to us. As Opti-Num, we've gained the knowledge and we've learned on how to approach the problem and solve it. The knowledge on the approach is ours, but the IP is theirs. Theirs being our client, being the medical device manufacturer. This is different to academia. We don't want the IP. Essentially, our client and our agreement is that they're paying us for our time to solve the problem, and the solution essentially is theirs. We can publish papers collaboratively, and we can have the knowledge and apply to similar problems and learn in new ways, but essentially the IP is theirs, and we give it to them. So that's why I can't share more on the modeling specifics. So the next one that I wanted to touch on is also about deployment and infrastructure. Why do we use MATLAB? So for those of you who don't know MATLAB, MATLAB allows us to do data preparation, modeling and training, and deployment. It gives us a lot of pre-built functionality that is really trusted. There are thousands of developers that are formally hired to essentially work on the tool set and maintain it every year, 2 versions a year. And they write documentation for it and they hold it true. And we're able to actually tell them when something doesn't perform the way it's supposed to. We can say, hey, this is the documentation. Can you please check this functionality? And if we need to, we can get bug fixes or feature fixes or whatever needs to happen. And there's a real benefit there to using to a trusted software development company to use those tools. Where we go from here is, what we're able to do is do the image acquisition with the tools, the processing, code generation that I spoke to you about. So we actually can take our MATLAB code and generate C++ code with it. And that allows us to do rapid prototyping, but also to have a pipeline for deployment. So we can play with different models and iterate on our models and then deploy to production in a safe, trusted, verifiable way. So MathWorks provides a single platform that supports the complete algorithm development from idea to production. So when we want to automate the image processing workflows, one of the benefits of using the tools, we have a comprehensive set of reference standard algorithms reference standard, like I mentioned, the tools are literally referenced with documentation as to the papers they come from and where that technique was researched, proved, all of the above. We've got native support for different medical file types, and we're able to complete the support for different types of image processing problems. So multimodal images or 3D volumetric segmentation. So we use deep learning. We use the tools in a deep learning context because we're able to interactively create, train, and analyze different networks. There are some helpful apps that help us to actually interrogate the different models we've worked with and what the structure of them are. We're able to access pre-trained networks and use them as a starting point. So we don't literally have to invent the wheel. We can leverage what's already been done by accessing other networks. And we can import or export models for working with other deep learning frameworks. So we're able to interoperate with things like TensorFlow, Keras, Caffe, PyTorch, all of those ones. And that allows us to actually make the most of everything that's in the field while still having a trusted software development platform to actually deploy from. So we can deploy applications locally or on the cloud with MATLAB compiler or production server. And these are essentially tools, MathWorks tools that allow us to integrate with different cloud services or, in different application formats. So what this does is it essentially takes MATLAB and wraps it. It wraps it in whatever you like, whether you feel like wrapping it in a C++ wrapping paper or Java or Python wrapping paper, and then you can go put that in a different universe and it can talk to it. So that's what we did in the pilot. The paid pilot, we used compiler. We were able to package in a C++ package and then integrate that with the infrastructure and architecture that was C++. But one better than that is actually, let me just finish this thought, is actually code generation. So we generate C and C++ code from our MATLAB, and that means it's far better performing and it's more verifiable, certifiable, because we can actually trace the models back to the source against requirements and verifications. So that was post-pilot. We've then now moved into this deployment approach to generate code from our MATLAB models. I saw that there's a lot going on, that there was a hand up. Are we good?
Yes, all good. I was just wondering if you'd mind turning off your camera. I see some of the guys are struggling a little bit with connectivity offline. So
All right.
thank you so much. And so sorry for interrupting.
No problem. Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, touching a little bit on licensing and pricing. Sometimes people ask me, how does this work? How will the medical device that lands up at Polokwane Hospital, will they have to have a MATLAB license on the machine? And no, so we're able to license with the deployment tools in essentially the licensing cost lands with the developer. And then as we deploy into different contexts, um, those deployment mechanisms actually encrypt the technology, the code, the models so that they're safe for distributing. And then users of that software don't need to have licenses for the tools. So it's almost as you launch a release of the software, the responsibility for having the MathWorks license ends with the developer. There's also different licensing mechanisms for startups, accelerators, commercial, academic. There's a whole lot of different mechanisms to license the tools, and it's definitely not a one size fits all. So, yeah, that's how we work through this, and this is how we've actually worked on the pilot, is that as we've expanded the technology and expanded the pilot into deployment, we literally are licensing appropriately for this context size of the project and in terms of the development and how it needs to be deployed. I'll touch a little bit on ethical responsibilities. I think there is definitely an ethical responsibility to consider responsible data science, business ethics, how we apply those ethics, and how do we move from traditional research into business and into products. I think one of the things that I try to stick to with this whole arena is that we need to listen to ideas that make us think hard and not just opinions that make you feel good. And I think that's been really something I've experienced a lot in this project. Is I think often as we spend more and more time and we're busy with the AI models and we're the developers and it becomes your baby, we need to not just have the opinion that yes, we think it's doing the right thing, we actually have to interrogate it. And so that's one of the things that we also have done is we put together a research panel of researchers from different universities who have expertise in these techniques and got them to actually give us advice on whether our modeling techniques were thorough enough, whether we were interrogating our approach thoroughly enough, and really not just opinions that make us feel good, but ideas that make us think hard. And it's all about rethinking. It's all about that scientific mindset that we have to we have to accept that we're learning and not we're not defending. We're really learning. So that being said, there is a whole ethics approval process that has to happen. We have to write ethics proposals that go to the universities that will run the studies, the National Health Research Department that gives permission for different hospitals to share their data with us, even though that data was collected using this manufacturer's device. We still have to apply to get that data and collect the field data retrospectively and going forward. We then have to get it analyzed and audited, train it. Then we run a clinical study, and the clinical study is part of this ethics proposal. And the outcomes of that study goes into certification before we can go into market. And so it's a lengthy process. It's by no means quick and easy, and it's essential for the validation and trustworthiness of the product. So touching a little bit on certification, compliance, and regulation. I'm going to speed through this just because I wanted to leave some time for questions. But as medical devices get more complex, we have a higher risk of design errors. Our medical devices have multi-domain components, which introduces challenges. We can have integration issues. We've definitely experienced that ourselves. Regulatory bodies are enforcing stricter guidelines on the software development processes. And so we have to be more rigorous in terms of documenting our verification and validation processes. So when we look at the software development process as a whole, we look at, okay, we have good machine learning practices where we select models, we select our data, we do model validation, we deploy the model, we then monitor the performance, and we go back to the drawing board. And eventually, this mechanism of documenting the software development process actually falls into the certification requirements. So the IEC standard says that you have to show, demonstrate, document your software development process. So what are the software requirements, the architecture, the development, the C code, and the tools really allow us to be able to easily automate some of the documentation of these elements. We also run a whole lot of deployment techniques, particularly continuous integration and continuous deployment. So we use a lot of best practice here in terms of agile programming, test-driven development. Our setup is sitting in GitLab. We write unit tests as we go. Those tests run on the server with every commit. We run special tests for special branches. We use the full test suite for the MATLAB code and the generated code, and we are able to generate code coverage reports for our tests. Our development workflow, we use, the main branch is protected, and we do oversight, and we run tests with that oversight, our deployment in branches, and we mirror our GitLab server to the client for transparency. So they're actually able to see all of the features and check out different branches as they need to. I'm not going to touch on these extra examples just out of time, but essentially the real innovation in the real world practical commercial project learnings, what we're trying to do here is we're not trying to invent something new from scratch. We're not saying this hasn't been done before. We're saying let's build a practical solution using what already exists. We don't want to write image processing algorithms from scratch. We don't even want to train models from scratch necessarily. We want to build something that has value to the world, and particularly has value to South Africa with a local medical device manufacturer. We don't want to rely on patchy functions that are not well tested or referenced. We actually want to lean on internationally software developed, really trusted software when we're going to be referencing the platforms that we've built on. And so, yeah, I think that brings me to the end of everything I wanted to talk about. I kind of raced to the end, and I realized now I'm like finished up here. But this is where I kind of wanted to leave you with this message of, we're really trying to build something practical and put it out into the world. And yeah, I'm keen to, if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to shoot.
Okay,
See, there's
fantastic. Yeah, I see there's a hand up. Let me see if I can unmute you, Josie, so you can actually use your mic. And then I see Rickus also has. So I'm just going to allow your mic. You should be able to unmute, Josie.
I was just giving a positive reaction to everything that we heard this morning, and thank you for the information that you provided us with.
That's a pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Rickus, your mic should be working now.
Thank you. And Kirsten, thank you. This was very interesting, for me at least. Rian did ask a interesting question, and we've been slightly chatting about it. You said the vast majority of images that you received were of men in trauma situations. Does call it the gender differences make any difference in how you approached your training data, or is it much of a muchness?
So it does actually make a difference. Interestingly, if you think about our use case for the chest X-ray, when we're trying to detect abnormalities in soft tissue, you can imagine the differences between male and female just in terms of the breast tissue that we'd be seeing. So it definitely does have an impact. And so we have to balance the data in order to reduce that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I see Wayne also asked a question here. He said this is a great example where science encounters science and an evidence-based approach is appreciated by all. What happens when science encounters commerce or business and all of the politics, bad data, and all that sort of stuff comes into play? How did you guys manage that?
It's an ongoing journey, and honestly, still managing it. It's, in my opinion, I think science sometimes scratches off a lot of the reality in order to make things fit and to make things work. And so in a lot of the research that we go through, we see that the data is often like harvested, that like it's prepared so that the results look a certain way. And often in the research, then they don't unpack the methodology often in order to actually reproduce those results. So on the one hand, you have research that is kind of using very idealistic data and not being transparent about the methodology. But then on a business side, there's a lot of demands in terms of, we have to do what we can. We have to use the data we have. We might not have everything we need. We have to get it out. We have to get it certified and compliant with. And so I think truly the midpoint ends up in our clinical trials. So we essentially have to do clinical trials of the software we developed in the real world, and then researchers essentially tell us how it performed, and that goes into certification, and the product gets stamped and put out into the wild. And so that's literally how we're navigating it. But it's definitely a journey, and by no means complete. Yeah.
That's an amazing answer. Thank you, Kirsten. Rikus, go for it.
Sorry, I'm just full of questions now. I was just thinking, if someone has, or how do you deal with someone that has implants? For example, a replaced knee or replaced hip, or any fused vertebra. Because I'm guessing that would show up very differently on an X-ray, but not pose a significant, or not. It should not be flagged as a problem.
So I'll take that question one step further. So if you can imagine also people who have had both their legs broken or they've had a car accident, they might not take their keys out of their front pocket or their belt buckle off. And so there's something that gets introduced as artifacts. So in the case of like a hip replacement or some kind of instrumentation inside the body, we still intend to pick that up as an anomaly. It's still abnormal to the normal subject. But whether it's keys in your pocket or whether you've swallowed batteries, that happens, some people do that, they still picked up as abnormal in either case. I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Alrighty, Kirsten, thank you so very much for an incredibly informative session. I think we have time for one final question if anyone has one. Otherwise, I will be releasing the recording, and if there are questions afterwards, you guys are welcome to send them through. Look on the YouTube channel, comment, like, share it with your friends. But Kirsten, this was incredibly interesting, and I really appreciate the way that you've presented this in such an incredibly insightful manner. So thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. And if there are no further questions, that is us for today. This was really cool.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Anytime. Alrighty, friends, have a beautiful rest of your day. This will be on our YouTube channel soon. I'll chat to you guys in a little bit. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.